They expected me to weep. I have thought about that a great deal since how certain everyone in that hall was, the morning of the choosing, that I would weep. They had arranged themselves for it. The front benches left a respectful gap around me, the way people leave space around a thing they expect to break. Even the rafters seemed to lean in, so when Garrick stood on the dais and spoke another woman's name instead of mine, I did the one thing none of them had prepared for. I smiled. It was not a brave smile, the kind you wear so no one sees the wound. It was the other kind. The kind that arrives before you can stop it, because something heavy has just been lifted off your chest and your face forgets to be polite about the relief. I felt it happen. I felt the corners of my mouth go before I had decided anything. And across the hall, on the high seat that no one but a king was permitted to fill, I saw Dakian go very still. He was the only one watching me instead of Garrick. I should explain about the chair. In the great hall of the Iron Territories, the king's table runs the length of the dais, and at its centre sits the wolf-throne black oak, worn pale at the arms. To its right, close enough to share a cup, stands a second chair. The Luna's chair. It has been empty for as long as I have been alive. No one sits in it. No one leans on it. The serving folk dust around it as though it might bruise. For 9 years it has stood beside the most powerful wolf alive like a question he refuses to answer. I knew all of this the way you know the weather. It had nothing to do with me. I was Ceres, third under the keep's healer, 23 years old, good with fever and bad with rank, and I had been promised like grain, like timber, like any other tribute owed up the chain of packs to Garrick of the Lofen, a vassal alpha with a thin pack and a thinner patience. That was the binding the choosing was meant to seal. Garrick had 3 women named as possible mates. He was to stand on the dais and select one, and pack law would close around the choice like a trap. For a month I had not slept properly. I had lain awake doing the arithmetic of a life in the Lofen, and the sum had always come out the same, and it had not been a number I wanted to live inside. And then he chose Sigrun. And the trap closed on someone else's wrist, and I smiled, and the king went still. If you have ever wondered what it costs a man to hide something for half a year, watch his face the moment he learns the secret was unnecessary. I did not understand yet that that was what I was watching. I only knew that the king of the Iron Territories looked at my relief as though it had been driven into him. Garrick was still talking, something gracious about the honour of the Union, the strength of the Lofen line. Sigrun stood beside him, with her chin lifted, beautiful in the deliberate way of women who have practiced it, and she was not looking at Garrick at all. She was looking at the high seat, at Dacian. I filed that away the way I file the colour of a wound. Afterward, in the press of the hall emptying, the old healer found me. Mistress Edda had hands like dried roots and no patience for ceremony. She took my chin and turned my face to the light from the high windows, studying me the way she studied a patient she suspected of lying about how much it hurt. "You smiled," she said. "I did." She let go of my chin. "Foolish girl." But she said it the way you'd say a blessing. I went back to the healer's quarters and ground willow bark until my arm ached, and I did not let myself think about the chair, or the stillness, or the fact that under my left sleeve, on the soft inside of my wrist, there was a mark the colour of moonlight that I had never told a living soul about. The mark had been there since the spring. I had woken one morning with it, a thin silver crescent, no wider than a fingernail, cool to the touch in a way that had nothing to do with the season. I had stared at it for a long time. I am a healer. I know what a claiming mark looks like, the way I know what a fracture looks like under skin. I knew what it was. What I did not know was how it had come to be on the wrist of a girl who had never in her life been alone in a room with the man whose claim it had to be. Because there was only one wolf in the Iron Territories strong enough to lay a mark that quiet, one who could touch a person's fate while she slept and leave nothing behind but a crescent and a chill. I had told no one. You do not walk into the great hall and announce that the king has marked you in secret. They would have called it ambition, or madness, or worse. So I had carried it under my sleeve through the whole long arrangement of my binding to Garrick, and I had told myself it meant nothing, that a king does not concern himself with a healer's apprentice, that there must be some other explanation I was too small to see. And then Garrick had chosen Sigrun, and the binding had dissolved like salt in water, and I had understood, standing in that hall with my face betraying me exactly why I was free. A lesser alpha cannot bind a woman already claimed by his king. Garrick had not chosen Sigrun over me. Garrick had not been allowed to choose me at all. The summons came 2 days later. Not from the king. From his better, a broad, tired man named Orin, who delivered it as though it embarrassed him. The king's library required someone with a healer's hand. A book had taken water damage. Certain pages had moulded. The steward thought a person who knew the difference between rot and rot might salvage what could be salvaged. It was the worst lie I have ever been told, and I have been told a great many by men trying to die quietly. The Library of the Iron Territories does not take water damage. It is the driest, warmest room in the keep, kept that way deliberately, because the king I would learn does not sleep well and reads instead. But I went. You do not refuse a summons, even a transparent one. The library was tall and amber-lit, the shelves climbing into shadow, the air thick with the smell of old vellum and beeswax and pine smoke. A long table held a single book, splayed open, and its pages were entirely insultingly dry. The king was standing at the far window with his back to me, and he did not turn around for a while. I had time to notice that he stood 3 full paces from the table, when one would have done that he had arranged the room so the width of it stayed between us. "You came," he said at last, to the window. "You sent a man to lie to me about a book." I set my satchel down. It seemed rude to make him do it twice. That turned him around. I had seen Dacian before, of course. Everyone had seen the king at the spring rites, at the judgments, a tall, dark presence at the centre of every room he entered, the kind of man whose stillness made other people loud. What I had not seen, until that moment, was the king uncertain. He looked at me the way a man looks at a debt he cannot find the bottom of. "The mark," he said. "So we were not going to pretend." "On my wrist," I said. "Yes, I assumed you knew. You put it there." Something moved in his jaw. "I had hoped," he said carefully, "that you had not noticed." I laughed. I did not mean to. It came out of me sharp and disbelieving, and entirely without permission. "You hoped a healer would not notice a claiming mark on her own arm. When you put it that way, it sounds unlikely. It sounds insane." He crossed to the table and then stopped, 2 paces short, and set his hand on the back of a chair instead, gripping the carved wood as though it were the only thing keeping him on his side of the room. I noticed that. I have never stopped noticing the things his hands do when the rest of him is trying to behave. "I will explain," he said. "And then you may decide what you wish to do, and I will abide by it. That is the only honest thing I have to offer you, so I would like to do it properly." "All right." He told me, in the spring, when the tribute rolls had come up from the vassal packs, my name had been on the list bound for the Lofen. He had read it the way he read everything without much attention, a name among names. And his wolf had stopped him cold. "I had never met you," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I had seen you twice, perhaps, across a courtyard. I did not know your voice. By every law of how the bond is supposed to work, there was nothing there for it to recognise. His grip tightened on the chair, and it recognised you anyway, from a name on a list. I have ruled for 9 years, and I have never in my life been less in command of myself than I was the morning I read that you were to be sent to Garrick of the Lofen. So you marked me. Cold was gathering at the back of my neck, in my sleep, without asking. Yes, he did not look away from it, to his credit. It was the only thing I could do that Garrick could not undo. A king's claim cannot be overruled by a lesser alpha. The moment the mark was set, The binding to the lofen was void in everything but ceremony they simply had not been told yet. He breathed out. I marked you to keep you off that wagon, not to put you on a different one. I did not want a Luna I had purchased the way Garrick was purchasing you. So I told no one. I let the ceremony go forward, knowing Garrick's wolf would feel the claim the instant he tried to choose you and would turn aside without understanding why. He chose Sigrun. His wolf chose anyone but you. Sigrun was simply standing nearest. For the first time, something almost like a smile crossed his face, and then was gone. I had a speech prepared, you understand, for when you found out. I had imagined you furious, I had imagined tears, I had imagined you demanding I strike the mark off, and I had decided I would do it, if you asked, whatever it cost. He stopped. And then, he said, you smiled. The whole hall had been arranged for my grief, and I had stood up in the middle of it and been glad, and the one man who understood why had been watching. I have not slept since, Datian said simply. I keep returning to it. You were freed of a man you did not want, and your first thought was relief, and I cannot stop wondering whether the relief was at being free of him or at being claimed by me. I have not the faintest idea which, and I find I cannot bear not knowing, and I have run a kingdom for 9 years without once being unable to bear something. The cold at my neck had become something else entirely. I do not know either, I told him. It was the truth, and it was the only gift I had. Both, I think. I have not had time to take them apart. He nodded slowly, as though I had handed him something heavy, and he was deciding where to set it down. Then take your time, he said. The mark stays only as long as you want it. The chair stays empty as long as you want that too. I have grown used to an empty chair. A pause. I had not grown used to wanting it filled. That is new, that is entirely your doing, and I would thank you not to look so pleased about it. I had not realised I was smiling again. There it is, you see. That is the thing about him I keep failing to describe to people afterward. He is the most feared wolf in 4 territories, and around me he loses arguments to his own face. If you have made it this far, stay with me. What comes next is the part I still have not entirely made peace with, and I want to tell it properly. If her voice is one you would keep listening to, you know what the little bell does. I will wait. There, after that, the books began. There was never another lie about water damage. We had spent that one. Instead, Orin would arrive in the healer's quarters with some volume or other, and the wooden expression of a man who has been given an errand he intends to pretend is dignified. The king wished my opinion on a treatise on fevers. The king had found a passage on willow bark he believed to be in error. The king, it transpired, had a great many questions about willow bark for a man who had survived 9 years without asking a single one. I knew exactly what the books were. So did the court, who watched me carry them back across the courtyard each evening and adjusted their estimation of me by some careful, invisible degree. I did not mind being watched. I minded the willowbark fictions, a little, only because they were beneath him. You do not have to invent a reason, I told him one evening, returning the fever treatise to the library. He was at the window again, though he stood less far from me now 2 paces, where it had been 3. I had been counting. I am a healer, I count things. If you want me to come, you can simply send for me. I will come. He turned the page of the book in his hands without looking at it. And if you would rather not come, on an evening when I have invented no reason, you would have to refuse the king outright. I would not put you in that room. He set the book down too carefully. A fiction about willowbark, you can decline without it being treason. I thought it the kinder lie. I had not considered that. I considered it then, standing in the warm amber light with my satchel against my hip, and something in my chest rearranged itself. That, I said, is the most thoughtful, insulting thing anyone has ever done to me. I will take it. The corner of his mouth moved. I have had worse from you. He had, by then. We had fallen into a way of talking that I have never managed with anyone else, a thing built mostly of what we did not finish saying. He would begin a sentence about the territories and let it die, and I would answer the part he had not spoken, and he would look at me as though I had picked a lock. I have heard people call him cold. They have never watched him try not to smile and fail. That night he reached out, when I turned to go, as if to take the satchel from my shoulder, some small courtesy, a king carrying a healer's bag to the door. His hand came up and stopped, a breath short of the strap. He let it fall. Neither of us remarked on it, but I felt the space where his hand had not landed for the whole walk back across the dark courtyard, and I understood that the distance he kept was not coldness, and not even caution. It was the only way he knew to ask permission for a thing he had already, in the spring, taken without it. He would not close that space again until I closed it first. He had decided that somewhere, privately, and never told me, and I knew it anyway. That is the trouble with a man who keeps his promises in silence. You have to be paying attention, or you miss being loved entirely. I was paying attention. I should tell you about Sigrun, because Sigrun is the reason this is a story, and not simply a strange, slow autumn. She had wanted the chair. Not Garrick was a consolation, a thin alpha with a thin pack, the best she could grab when the thing she actually wanted slipped past her. What Sigrun had wanted, for years, was to fill the seat beside the wolf throne, and she had built her whole life around the certainty that no one else would. An empty chair is a kind of promise to a woman like that. It says, not yet, but possibly you. And then a healer's apprentice started carrying the king's library books back and forth across the courtyard, and the steward stopped pretending there had ever been a water-damaged volume, and the court began to do the arithmetic. She came to the healer's quarters herself. That was her first move, and it nearly worked, which is the part I think about. She came in the guise of a patient, a headache, she said, the kind that comes from too little sleep. I sat her down and felt her pulse and asked the questions you ask, and the whole time she watched my left sleeve. You wear that cuff laced very high, she observed, for someone who works with her hands. It keeps the willow bark out of the wound. Does it? She smiled. She had a lovely smile. I will give her that. There is a tincture, I am told, that lifts a claiming mark. Painful, but quick. A woman who found herself marked against her will by anyone, however highly placed, might want to know such a thing exists. For her freedom. She let the word sit. I could send some to you. Discreetly, one healer to another's apprentice. I understood her perfectly. If the mark were gone, the claim was gone. If the claim were gone, the chair was empty again, and the promise was alive again, and Sigrun could go back to building her life around it. That is generous, I said. But the mark is not against my will. It was the first time I had said it out loud, and it landed in me like a true thing finding its place. I watched her register that I had said it on purpose. She left without her tincture and without her headache, which had never existed, and 3 days later, a man I did not know put a powder in the willowbark stores, meant for the king's evening cup. That was her second move, and it would have worked, except that I am a healer, and willowbark does not smell of bitter almond, and I caught the wrongness with my nose before anyone caught it with their throat. I did not run to the king. I want to be honest about that, because it is the moment I am least proud of and most myself. I did not run to him. I gathered the tainted stores into a sealed jar, and I found the boy who had carried them, and I followed the thread of who had paid him, and only when I had the whole shape of it did I walk up to the high table during the evening meal uninvited, a healer's apprentice in a willowbark-stained apron, in front of the entire court, and set the jar down beside the king's untouched cup. The hall went quiet the way a forest goes quiet before weather. Do not drink tonight, I said. Just that to him, low. Then I turned to the table at large, and I found Sigrun's face, and I held it. Someone has been generous with the king's cup. I thought the king's healers should know what generosity smells like. I have replayed that moment more than I have replayed any other, and I still cannot tell you where the steadiness came from. My voice did not shake. I heard it leave me even and clear, and I did not recognize it as mine. Sigrun recovered beautifully. She always did. How dramatic, she said to the room. The apprentice imagines herself poisoned, or imagines herself important. It is so often the same disease in girls of her station. I imagine very little, I said. It is a flaw in me. I only know what is in front of me. And what is in front of me is a jar of bitter almond and a boy in the kitchen who can tell you who filled his hand with silver. It was the boy who broke. They always break. The ones who are paid. Loyalty bought is loyalty that runs the moment running is cheaper. By the time he had finished, the whole arithmetic of it lay on the table between the platters, and Sigrun's lovely composure had gone the grey of old ash. And the king had not moved. He had not risen, had not drawn breath to defend me, had not played the rescuer. He had watched me do it, his hand flat on the dark wood, and when it was finished he turned to his beta, and said only, Orin, see the Lady Sigrun to the south road, and see that the south road continues for as long as she does. Exile, in the dry language of kings. Then he looked at me. The whole court was watching, and he looked at me as though we were the only two people who had ever been in that hall, and he stood, and he pulled out the empty chair. The Luna's chair, pale at the arms, untouched for 9 years. Sit, he said. Not a command. The opposite of a command. I have never heard a man put so much asking into a single word. If you want to, only if you want to. I want you to understand what that chair meant. To sit in it, in front of the court, after the poison and the exile and the months of carrying his secret under my sleeve to sit in it, was to answer the question he had not been able to bear, not knowing. It was to take the relief apart, at last, and show him which half had been which. I crossed the dais. The cold came then. I had not expected the cold. The bond, half-claimed for half a year, unspoken and unfinished, did not want to be completed gently. It dragged at me as I crossed those few feet, a weight settling over my chest, frost gathering at the silver crescent on my wrist until the mark burned like ice. A claim acknowledged is a claim that asks everything at once. I understood, distantly, that this was the bond demanding to know whether I meant it, whether I would carry the whole of what the chair held, the scrutiny, the danger, the 9 empty years, all of it, or whether I would falter halfway and leave the seat cold again. I gripped the back of the chair until the carving bit into my palm. I did not falter. I sat down, and the cold broke like a held breath let go, and warmth came up through the mark on my wrist, and across that small space, the king of the Iron Territories let out the breath I think he had been holding since the spring. He did not make a speech. I told you he had one prepared, and I have always been glad he did not use it. What he did was lean down, in front of all of them, and say quietly, only for me, though the whole silent hall strained to hear it, I have been keeping that chair empty for someone. I did not know who. I think I have always been a little afraid of finding out. His voice did the thing it did only around me, the thing that made the legend of him fall away. It was you. It was always going to be you. I am sorry it took a poisoning, and your own 2 hands to make me say so. You could have simply asked me, I told him. I am the king of the Iron Territories. The corner of his mouth went. I do not know how to ask for things. I only know how to keep chairs empty and hope. He kissed me then. I will not try to describe it, except to say that something I had been holding shut for half a year came open, and that I understood, in the space of it, every empty chair and every quiet door and every book carried across a courtyard for no reason anyone would admit to. It was not the beginning of anything. It was the moment the thing that had already begun, in secret, in the spring, finally surfaced and let itself be seen. Then he straightened, and the court remembered how to breathe, and somewhere in the back someone began uncertainly, then less so to cheer. The fallout was not nothing. I want to be honest about that too, because the stories that end the moment the couple is happy have always struck me as cowardly. A king does not seat a healer's apprentice beside the wolf throne without consequence. The vassal packs grumbled, the Lofin, robbed of a binding and embarrassed in front of the territories, sent a letter so stiff with wounded pride that Dacian read it aloud to me by the library fire, doing all the voices, until I laughed so hard I could not breathe. Garrick himself, to his credit, sent nothing and quietly married a Lofen woman who, I am told, leads him around by the nose and has made the thin pack considerably less thin. I bear him no ill will. He was only ever a wagon I did not want to be loaded onto. The court took longer. There were weeks of careful sentences and watchful eyes, of nobles deciding whether to wager on the healer or against her. I did not perform for them. I had not performed for the king. I was not about to start for his court. I went on knowing the difference between rot and rot, and I treated their fevers when they came to me, high-born and low alike, and slowly the watching turned into something else. You cannot outstare a woman who is busy being useful. They gave up before I did. The mark on my wrist deepened from silver to something warmer, the way a claim does when it is met. And the chair was never empty again. A year later, and I will close here. Because a year is when the shape of a thing becomes clear, I sat in it on an ordinary evening. Not a ceremony, just the long table and the firelight and the smell of bread and pine. Dacian was arguing with Orin about a grain levy and losing, which he did often now and seemed to enjoy. A letter had come that morning from Mistress Edda, who had taken my old place in the healer's quarters and complained about it in every line, which is how I knew she was happy. I was turning the willowbark question over there is always a willowbark question when I caught the king watching me again. Across the small space. The way he had in the hall, the morning of the choosing, when everyone else was looking at someone else. You are doing the thing, I told him. What thing? The thing where you look at me as though you are still surprised I sat down. He considered this. He set his cup down too carefully, which is how I always know the true thing is coming. I am, he admitted. I expect I always will be. You smiled, that morning, when you were supposed to weep. Do you know I built half a kingdom's worth of dread around the question of what that smile meant? I know. You told me. You did not sleep. I sleep now. He said it as though it were the most extraordinary fact in the world, and from him, I suppose it was. I keep waiting to stop being grateful for it. It has been a year and I have not stopped. I reached over and laced my fingers through his on the dark wood of the table, the silver warm crescent at my wrist catching the firelight, and I did not say anything clever. Because there are moments that do not require it, and a woman who has spent her whole life being clever learns, eventually, to recognize them. I had expected to be sent up the chain of packs like grain. Instead, I had smiled at the wrong moment, in the right hall, in front of the one man who would lie awake over it, and the smile had cost me nothing and bought me everything, which is not how anything is supposed to work, and is the only thing that has ever worked out exactly right in my entire life. So, tell me, did you see it coming? Did you know, when I smiled, what the smile was for? I have always wondered whether it reads on a stranger's face the way it read on his. Stay with me, if you would. Her side of the story is the only side I know how to tell, and there are more of us than you would think, smiling in halls that expected us to weep. Settle in, and I will tell you another. 3 months after the Alpha King rejected me in front of his entire court, I was dusting the chair he had been sitting in when he did it. I want to be clear that this was not a plan. I am not the sort of woman who plots her way back into the house of the man who broke her. I had simply discovered, in the weeks after, that a rejected mate from a disgraced family has exactly 2 roads open to her, and one of them ended in a river. So I took the other one. I tied my hair the plain way the village women wear it. I traded my one good dress for brown wool. I gave the housekeeper a name that was not mine, and I let the largest household in the territory hire the quietest pair of hands it had ever seen. He did not recognize me. That was the part I had counted on, and the part that, every single day, took something out of me anyway. My name is Marin. In the king's house, I was Pell, which I chose because it was the dullest sound I could think of on short notice, and dullness was the whole of my ambition. I was 25, a woman grown, and 4 months earlier I had stood in the ceremony hall of the Iron Hold in a dress my mother sewed by hand, with a vow folded into my sleeve that I had written myself and never got to speak, while Soren of the Iron Hold, the Alpha King, the strongest wolf in 3 territories, looked at me with no expression at all, and said the words that sever a bond before the whole assembled pack. I will not describe what a public rejection does to the wolf on the receiving end. The pack laws call it severing, and the word is honest. A weaker wolf can die of it. I did not die of it, which surprised a great many people, my own family chief among them, and which I have come to understand meant something I did not understand at the time. I survived it. And then, because surviving is a habit and not a triumph, I came to his house to scrub his floors, and I told myself it was only that I had nowhere else to go. That was the lie. It was a good lie. I kept it the way you keep a coal banked under ash, never letting it catch, never quite letting it die. The truth was that I needed to know why. Because here is the thing no one tells you about being rejected by a man whose wolf has chosen you. The choosing does not stop. The bond he severed in front of 200 witnesses had not, in fact, fully closed. I felt it the first morning I passed him in the gallery, a thread where there should have been a clean scar. A pull toward a man who had every reason to be the last creature on earth I wanted to feel anything toward. I hated it. I hated that some animal part of me, even then, even after, turned toward him like a plant toward a window. I decided I would find out what kind of man does that, chooses a woman with his whole wolf, and then humiliates her before his kingdom. And then I would be cured of the thread. And then I would leave. It took me far longer than it should have to understand that I had the question backwards. The Iron Hold is a warm house, which I had not expected. From the outside, it is all black stone and iron, and the kind of grimness that keeps rival packs polite. Inside, it smells of bread and beeswax, and the particular green smell of the herbs Mistress Bryony hangs in the kitchen passage. And the fires are kept high. And the king's library, I learned this slowly, in the way a servant learns the geography of a house she is not supposed to have opinions about. The king's library is the warmest room in it. I was good at being Pell. I was good at being no one. I had a great deal of practice being looked through, having spent 4 months as the most looked at woman in the territory, for all the wrong reasons. I kept my eyes down. I learned the corridors. I learned which of the warriors were kind and which were not. And I learned the shape of the king's days, the way you learn whether you intend to stay out of. He worked late. He ate little. He did not laugh. Though once I heard his beta, Osric, say something low in the gallery and saw the corner of the king's mouth move. And the movement was not a smile so much as the memory of where a smile used to live. He kept to 3 rooms, the hall, the study, the library. And he moved through his own house like a man walking the edge of a frozen lake, testing every step. A grieving man. I knew the gate. I had been walking it myself. I did not want to know that about him. It is much easier to scrub the floors of a man you can despise. The first time he spoke to me directly, I dropped a candlestick. It was in the library. I had thought the room empty. It was past the hour he usually left it, and I was returning a stack of household ledgers to the shelf where Mistress Bryony kept them, and his voice came out of the high-backed chair by the fire where I had not seen him sitting. "You move things and put them back in better order than you found them," he said. "The keeper of the accounts has been complaining for a year that the ledgers are a disgrace. They are not a disgrace anymore. That is you." The candlestick hit the floor. I went down after it before he could, brown and quick and keeping my face turned away, and I heard my own voice come out steadier than I had any right to expect. "I beg pardon, my king. I only set them where they go." "That is precisely my point." A pause. "Look at me." I had spent 4 months in his house, arranging my entire existence around not doing that one thing. I looked at the floor. I looked at the dropped candlestick. I looked at the hem of his dark robe 3 paces away, because he had not come closer. He never came closer. He kept a distance from everyone, like a man who had learned that nearness was a debt that came due. "I am poor at being looked at, my king," I said. "I do better in corners." It should have ended there. A king does not coax a maid. But he was quiet a moment, and when he spoke again there was something underneath the words I had not heard from him in the hall, where he was all iron. "So do I," he said. "Carry on." I carried on. I went down the gallery with my heart doing something undignified, and I told myself it was fear of discovery, and it was, partly, and the rest of it I did not have a name for yet. If you have ever hated someone and then caught them being human when they thought no one was watching, you know the particular vertigo of what came next. I will try to tell it plainly. He began to seek me out. Not as a man seeks a woman. He did not know I was a woman he had ever seen before. That was the whole horror and the whole engine of it. He sought out the quiet maid who put his ledgers in order, the one who did not flinch and did not flatter, and answered him as though he were a person and not a throne. He would find reasons. The accounts wanted copying. The library wanted a second pair of hands among the old rolls. He would say 3 sentences to me and then sit in silence while I worked. And the silence was not the silence of a master tolerating a servant. It was the silence of a man who had not been spoken to like a person in a very long time, and had forgotten he was starving for it. His wolf knew. I am certain of that now. His wolf knew exactly who I was and could not make his mind hear it. And so it did the only thing it could. It kept turning him toward me, baffled, the way the thread kept turning me toward him. Lady Audra noticed before either of us did. I should tell you about Lady Audra. After my rejection, the court had needed a new story, and Lady Audra of the Vale had supplied one. That the king had seen sense, that the disgraced daughter had never been worthy, and that there was, conveniently, a woman of impeccable blood and Eastern alliances already at court who would make a far steadier Luna. She had spent 4 months arranging herself toward the empty place at his side, with the patience of water working at stone. She was beautiful in the way that organises a room, and she had a particular gift for noticing where the king's attention went, because the king's attention was the whole of her ambition. She noticed it going to a maid. She found me in the herb passage, where Mistress Bryony's bundles hang, and she did not come alone. She came with the keeper of the accounts and a steward, which is how a clever woman makes a private cruelty look like a matter of household concern. "The new girl," she said, looking at me the way you look at a stain you intend to have removed. "Pell, is it? No family anyone can name, no village anyone can place. Hired in a season when this house should be careful who it lets near its king." She let it sit. "There has been a great deal of carelessness in this house lately. I mean to see it corrected. You will be questioned, properly, by the steward, about where you came from and who sent you. A house that nearly seated a traitor as its Luna cannot be too careful about its servants." It was a good move. I will give her that even now. I had no past that would survive questioning. Pell was 4 months old and made of brown wool. One real afternoon, with a careful steward, and I would be exposed, not as the king's rejected mate, which was almost worse, but as a woman travelling under a false name in the household of the most paranoid king in 3 territories, which in those days was the kind of thing that ended at the end of a rope. She nearly had it. The steward set an hour. The keeper nodded along. What Lady Audra did not account for was that the maid she meant to break had spent 4 months with her hands in the king's accounts, and a woman with her hands in the accounts learns whose names appear in the margins of the Eastern grain shipments, and how often, and in whose hand the orders are written. I did not say any of that. I said, "As the steward wishes, my lady." And I kept my eyes down, and I went to find the one thing in that house that could buy me an afternoon's delay. I went to the library, because the king was always in the library, and I had learned that the king outranked the steward. He was at the long table, with the old rolls spread in front of him, and there was ink on his hands, and when I came in he looked up, and something in his face did a thing I had not seen it do. It eased, fractionally, the way a held breath eases. Then he saw I was distressed, and the easing turned to something sharper. "Who?" he said. Not what is wrong. Who? As though he already knew that whatever had upset the quiet maid in his library had a name and a face, and he intended to learn both. "It is nothing, my king. A household matter. Lady Audra wishes me questioned about my origins, which is her right." I kept my voice level. "I came only to return these rolls." He set down the pen. For a long moment he did not say anything, and I watched his hands, because noticing is the only weapon I have ever reliably owned, and I noticed that one of his fingers rested on the corner of a folded page that lay apart from the rolls, a single page he had drawn out and set where his hand could reach it, the way you keep near you a thing you cannot put away and cannot bear to look at directly. "There will be no questioning," he said. "You answer to me, not to Lady Audra, and I am satisfied with where you came from." "You do not know where I came from, my king." "No," he said, and he looked at me when he said it, and the look went on a beat too long. "But my wolf is, and lately I have learned to stop arguing with it. Go, tell the steward the king requires his maid elsewhere." I went, and I would have left it there. I had my afternoon, I had my delay, except that as I turned, my eyes caught the folded page under his hand, and I saw, upside down, and only for an instant, the edge of writing on it. I knew that writing. I had spent a winter learning to make my letters even, at a table by a window, while my mother told me a Luna must write a fair hand because a Luna signs things that matter. I knew the particular way I closed my open letters. I knew it the way you know your own face in dark water. It was my vow. The one I had folded into my sleeve 4 months ago and never spoken. The one that should have burned with the rest of my disgrace. The king of the Ironhold had it on his table, drawn out where his hand could reach it, worn soft at the fold from handling. If you are still with me, and I find, against everything, that I hope you are, this is the place in the telling where I have to stop and breathe, because it is the place where I stopped breathing the first time. What comes next is the part where I learned what kind of man he actually was, and it was not the part I went looking for. Stay with me through it. And if this is the kind of story you want more of, her side, told in the voice of the woman who lived it, the bell is how you tell me to keep telling them. Press it. I will wait. There. Now let me tell you about the letter. Because I did not sleep that night, and the not sleeping made me reckless, and the next morning when he left the library for the training yard, I did the thing I had spent 4 months not allowing myself to do. I went to his table, and I unfolded the page beside my vow, and I read the letter that had ruined my life. It was addressed to the chieftain of the Eastern Pax. It promised, in plain terms, that once the writer was made Luna of the Ironhold, she would see the eastern passes opened and the king's warders drawn back, in exchange for a place at the eastern table when the hold fell. It was treason, complete and damning, the kind of letter that justifies any rejection, any humiliation, any severance spoken before a watching pack. It was signed with my name. It was not my hand. I knew it was not my hand, the way I had known the vow was, instantly, in the body before the mind. Whoever had forged it was good. They had studied me. The slant was close, the closing letters nearly right. But I had spent a winter learning to make my letters even at a table by a window, and the woman who wrote this had learned somewhere else, and the somewhere else was in every stroke. And here is what undid me, kneeling at the king's table with the lie in one hand and my unspoken vow in the other. He had kept them both. The forgery that damned me and the vow that would have bound me. He had kept them side by side, drawn out where his hand could reach, worn soft at the folds. For 4 months, the man who rejected me before his whole kingdom had been sitting alone in the warmest room in his house, comparing the hand that betrayed him to the hand that had promised to love him. And somewhere in those 4 months, he had begun to see what I had seen in an instant. The hands did not match. He had not rejected me. He had rejected a letter. He had stood in that hall with his mother 4 years dead, murdered, I would learn, poisoned at her own table by the same Eastern faction this letter promised the passes to, and he had been handed proof, in what he believed was my hand, that the woman his wolf had chosen was the knife aimed at his heart. And he had done the only thing a king who had already lost 1 Luna to that knife could do. He had made me powerless. He had made me hated. He had severed the bond in public so completely that no faction could ever use me against him again, and he had done it believing he was killing the only thing he had ever wanted in order to keep his kingdom alive. He had been wrong. And he had spent 4 months beginning to suspect he had been wrong, alone, with 2 folded pages, and no idea that the woman in the brown wool dusting his shelves was the one who could have told him the truth in a single sentence. I had come to his house to learn what kind of man rejects his mate before his kingdom. He was the kind who does it to save her from the thing that killed his mother, and then keeps her vow for 4 months because he cannot bear to be the man who threw it away. I folded both pages back exactly as they had been. I did not confront him. I am a coward in precisely one direction, and I had just learned his name was Soren, and not the name I had been calling him in my head for 4 months, which was something closer to enemy. The trouble was that Lady Audra had also spent 4 months learning his attention, and she had felt it turn. And a woman like that does not wait to understand a thing before she destroys it. She moved at the reinstatement. I should explain. With his suspicion growing, and the Eastern grain shipments going where they should not, the king had called a court, a formal reckoning, the whole pack assembled in the same hall where he had severed me, to review the loyalties of the great houses before the Eastern packs grew any bolder. It was meant to be the beginning of him pulling the truth apart, thread by thread. Lady Audra understood, better than he did, that the thread led to her. So she decided the court would end differently than he intended. She had the forger's gift and the forger's nerve. She brought a second letter to that hall, a fresh one, in the same false hand as the first, naming the new-made Pell as an Eastern agent placed in the household to finish what the disgraced daughter had begun. 2 traitors, 1 story, tidily closed. And she had arranged, with the Eastern chieftain's man, that in the confusion of a maid being dragged from the hall as a spy, a blade would find the king while his guard was looking the wrong way. The same blade, the same table, the same faction that had taken his mother. She would be the grieving, loyal lady left standing beside an empty throne. And the throne does not stay empty long. It nearly worked. That is the part I need you to understand. It very nearly worked. She read her letter to the assembled pack. She named me. The hall turned, 200 faces, to the maid standing at the edge of the hall, and the steward's men started toward me. And across the room I saw the Eastern chieftain's man shift his weight and slide his hand beneath his coat, exactly as another man had once reached beneath his coat for a blade in a different hall. And I understood the whole shape of it in a single breath. I had spent 4 months keeping my eyes down. I had spent 4 months being no one. I had a forged letter in the king's library that did not match my hand, and I had the Eastern grain ledgers in my memory with Lady Audra's own orders written in the margins. And I had a thread to a man across the room that I had been pretending for 4 months I did not feel. I stopped being Pell. I did not shout that I was innocent. Innocence is a thing the accused always claims and the pack has learned to ignore. I crossed the floor instead. The maid, walking up the centre of the hall every eye had just been told to fear. And I did not go to the steward, and I did not go to my own defence. I went to the king, and I put myself between him and the Eastern chieftain's man, in the instant the blade came clear. And I called my wolf. I need to tell you what that cost, because it was not nothing. A severed bond does not want to be reopened. He had closed it in public, completely, the way you were taught to, and for 4 months it had stayed a thread, only because some part of him had refused the last of it. But a thread is not a bond, and what I needed in that hall was the whole thing, all of it, the full weight of a mate bond answered, because that is the one thing on earth that no forged letter and no severance right can argue with. So I tore it back open. I forced the thing he had cut to knit itself whole in the space of a heartbeat, and it fought me the entire way, and it hurt like drowning hurts, from the inside, the body fighting the thing that will save it. There was blood in my mouth where I had bitten through my own lip. I did not feel it bite. And then the bond came whole, and Soren's wolf rose to meet mine in front of the entire assembled pack. The bond he had severed answered, blazing, undeniable, the one sound a pack is built to recognise and forbidden to fake. The Eastern chieftain's man froze with the blade half raised because every wolf in that hall had just dropped, on instinct, into stillness, before a thing older than any of them. The guards had him before he drew his next breath. And the king of the Ironhold turned and looked at the maid bleeding beside his throne, and for the first time in 4 months, his mind heard what his wolf had been screaming since the night I dropped a candlestick in his library. Maron, he said. Not Pell. My name. The name he had severed in this very hall. It came out of him like something breaking. I did the only thing I could think to do, which was the thing I had carried folded in my sleeve for 4 months and never been permitted to say. I had the words by heart. I had written them at a table by a window, in a winter that felt like another woman's life. I spoke my vow, out loud, in the hall where he had taken my voice, in front of the court that had watched him do it. I finally said the thing I had come there to say 4 months and 1 rejection too late. I will not give you the whole of it. Some things are mine. But I will tell you it ended with the line that a Luna speaks to bind herself to a king, and that I spoke it not to the throne and not to the crown, but to the man who had kept my vow on his table because he could not throw away the only true thing anyone had ever offered him. The hall did not breathe. And then the strongest wolf in 3 territories, in front of the pack that had watched him cast me down, did the thing that costs a king more than blood. He went down on 1 knee to a maid in brown wool, and he took the forged letter from Lady Audra's frozen hand and held it up beside a household ledger any clerk in the room could fetch, And he said, in the voice that was all iron, the voice the hall had learned to fear, "This is not her hand. It was never her hand. I rejected the truest thing in my kingdom on the word of a forgery, and I have known it for a season and lacked the courage to say so. Bring me the woman whose hand this is." They did not have to bring her. The hands matched, and the whole court could see it, and Lady Audra of the Vale did not run. I will give her that. She stood in the centre of the hall she had meant to remake, and watched it close over her like water over a dropped stone. The Eastern chieftain's man was taken by his own escort, who had no wish to die for a treason that had failed in front of 200 witnesses. Lady Audra was given the one mercy the law allows a noblewoman who moves against the throne and loses. She was stripped of her name and her veil, and sent down the eastern road at dawn, into the arms of the faction she had served, who, I am told, were not pleased to receive a woman whose usefulness had so publicly ended. I was not sorry. I had learned, that season, exactly what it costs to put a false name in another woman's hand. The kiss, when it came, was not in that hall. He was not a man who would spend the truest thing he had in front of an audience, and neither, it turned out, was I. It came later, in the warmest room in the house, with the door open and the 2 folded pages on the table between us, and the ink long dry. I will tell you only this about it. I had come to his house certain I needed to learn why he had broken me, so that I could be cured of him and leave. And when he finally chose me, out loud, in his own voice, knowing exactly who I was, what broke open in me was not the wound I had come to nurse. It was the understanding that I had never once, in 4 months of telling myself I stayed because I had nowhere to go, considered that I had stayed because some part of me had always known the hands would not match. That is all I will say about the kiss. Some things are mine. He took up the pen after, and he drew my vow toward him, the page worn soft at the fold, and he asked me, asked, a king, asked, whether he might keep it. I told him he had been keeping it for 4 months without asking, and I did not see why he should start now. The corner of his mouth moved. Up close, it cost him more than a laugh, and was worth more. A year on, the house has the wrong shape, and I am the reason, and I have made my peace with being the reason. The library door does not close anymore. It never had, I have since learned, since the night his mother died, because a man who lost a Luna to a poisoned table learns to keep a sight line to every room he loves. But it is open now for a different reason, and the court has learned to knock on the frame. Mistress Bryony pretends she always knew, and tells anyone who will listen that she hired the next Luna of the Ironhold for the price of a maid, which is true, and which she will not let me forget. Osric still says low things in the gallery to make the corner of the king's mouth move, and I have learned at last what he says, and they are mostly about me, and I have decided to be flattered. The eastern passes are warded twice over now, and the grain goes where it should, and twice a year I take the ledgers down myself and check the margins, because I learned the value of a margin the hard way, and I do not intend to forget it. The keeper of the accounts has stopped complaining. He says the ledgers have never been in better order. That is me. There is a letter on my table this morning from my mother, who did not believe it when the word reached her village that her disgraced daughter had been made Luna of the Ironhold, and who has written to ask whether it is true, and whether I am writing to her in my own hand, or whether someone is writing for me, because a Luna signs things that matter, and she wants to be sure the signature is mine. It is mine. I have checked it against a page he keeps on his table, worn soft at the fold. It matches. So tell me, before you go, did you know, the first morning I dropped that candlestick, that he would never be able to send me away? Or did you think, as I did, that the safest thing a broken woman can do is put on a false name and keep her eyes on the floor. Stay and tell me in the comments where you are listening from tonight, and whether you would have read the letter on his table or left it folded. And if her side of the story is the side you want, the one told by the woman who lived it, in the voice he gave back to her, then you know what the bell does. Press it. I will be here. I have stopped, at long last, keeping my eyes on the floor.